find it hysterical that the Republicans are falling on their fainting couches, suggesting, actually wrongly, but nonetheless suggesting, oh my God, Hunter Biden made $5 or $10 million off his dad's name, and Jared Kushner walks away with $2 billion. I mean, actually $3.5 billion. The first was in 2018 when Qatar, after they barricaded the country, coughed up $1 billion to refinance his 666 Fifth Avenue building. So yeah, it is pretty funny, pretty pathetic too.
Pathetic, and I don't know if you ever knew this. There was a party after Sicko premiered in New York City. In New York City, party, very exclusive. Michael Moore and all his folks are there, and here are the people who were in the film. Were there, I think, just to shake hands and say howdy. Jared Kushner was there.
Yeah, well, he was a big donor to the Democratic Party
up
until Donald ran for president, because the Democratic Party, it was purely transactional. The Democratic Party runs New York State and New York City, and Kushner wanted to have political juice. His father was a big Democratic donor too, before he went to prison. And so, give money to the Democrats. Makes sense.
Yeah, I think that the money, follow the money. I mean,
yeah.
Maybe that's the biggest thing right now, Thom. Maybe the trying to find a way to get some of the money out of our political system. Citizens United and all the things that happen that constrain us regular folks from having a say in the democratic process and really feeling like we're going to keep our country together. Are we going to keep our country together, do you think?
Oh yeah, I don't see any scenario under which the United States breaks up. We're not as cleanly or clearly geographically divided as we were in 1861. You had literally different political and legal systems operating in the South versus the North at that time. The South, between the period of 1820 and 1860, had become, a fascist state essentially that was ruled by about 2,000 families. And the North had become, relatively speaking, for its time anyway, a functioning democracy. And the fascists decided that they couldn't tolerate a democracy to their north and rose up against it. There's certainly a fascist element in today's GOP, and there's a fascist element, regionally. A lot of rural dwellers would be very happy with fascism, particularly if it clamped down on the big cities. This is a dynamic that was very, very similar to the dynamic in Germany in the early 1930s. You had very cosmopolitan, kind of pushing the edge folks in Berlin and, the big cities, and the rural areas of Germany were extraordinarily conservative. There's a great movie about this on Netflix called El Dorado, and it's about the group that Hitler actually came after first, which was a nightclub and medical treatment center for trans people in Berlin. First they came for the trans people was the literal truth, and it's an amazing movie. But you're seeing that kind of dynamic in the United States. I just don't think that the support for fascism in this country is as strong as it was in Germany in the 20s. I think in large part in the 30s. And I think that's in large part because we can now look back on that example and have learned from it.
I think that's, Thom, I think that's the key thing when I read your writing, is that if we don't learn from history, then what? Do we, then what? Do we just put our own little tag and do it again, or what do we do? Yeah. And I think that's when I read your writing, sometimes I have to take a big deep breath. I go, whew, yeah, Thom's right. That's what history has taught us about this. Now, what do we do together to make it not be the case that we have this happen for all of us? And in particular, healthcare is something I know you're very interested, I'm very interested in. In particular, I think right now the epidemic of mental health issues is striking to me, not only in personal experience and with family, but out in the community, the rates of teen suicide and all what seems to be like despair in the community of healthcare givers who are morally exhausted from the last few years, and there's not enough of them. And when do we get to the point, Thom, where we give healthcare to one another, where we decide that this is the best way, the most economical way to provide healthcare for each of us? Are we going to get there before you and I die, or are we going to be gone before then?
I think so. I really do. I mean, it's in the way that national healthcare system happened in Canada was in the 1960s. Tommy Douglas was the governor of, I think governor is the title, maybe it's premier of Saskatchewan, of one of the states, one of the provinces of Canada. And he had been an advocate all the way back to the 1920s of single payer healthcare system. And so he was able to run for election on that platform and get it put into place in that province, in that state. And it worked really well. And, over the course of the next decade or so, state after state or province after province said, let's do what they're doing. I think that the key to a single payer healthcare system in the United States is for one of our states, ideally a fairly large state, to adopt it. And, Vermont tried to do this a decade ago. Peter Welch, in fact, was in the state Senate. I know him, sort of know him.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, he is. And he ran for governor on the platform of, I'm going to give you single payer healthcare. And he got elected, and he did. The problem was that what he hadn't anticipated, what he didn't realize, is that if you go to a single payer healthcare system, everybody has to be in, which means that everybody in the state who's on Medicare or Medicaid suddenly loses their federal Medicare and Medicaid dollars, and those dollars just no longer come into the state. And with only 600,000 people, that would have broken Vermont. The solution to this, it has to be passed by Congress, and that's why we really need to have a strong Democratic majority in the House and Senate. Particularly one in the Senate that will overcome a filibuster. But the solution to this is to provide states on an as-needed basis with a waiver to that Medicare rule and Medicaid rule, so that the money, the Medicare and Medicaid money, can still come into the state, even though, the way that the law was set up, and it was set up, for good reason in the first place, the Medicare law, they didn't, Lyndon Johnson and Robert Ball, who wrote the bill, did not trust the southern states. Medicare was arguably the most effective racial integration program in the history of the United States. All these hospitals signed on to it because they wanted the dollars, not realizing or realizing, but not thinking it would be enforced, that there was a provision in the paper that they were signing that said that they could no longer racially discriminate in their hospitals. And so, in 1 year, 1967, 68, you saw American hospitals go from almost being fully segregated to being almost fully integrated. It was the most rapid integration, literally, in the history of America, in any sector, anywhere. And in terms of absolute numbers, the largest we've ever experienced. So, but they knew that, these states would fight it if they possibly could. So they made this law, they constructed the law in such a way that every time DC wrote a check, it had to go to that individual in Mississippi, not to the state of Mississippi. And so that's the problem. When you pull the individuals out of the system for a single payer healthcare system, there's no provision at law to give the money to the state and pass it, along. And that has to be changed.
I think Ro Khanna's working on that. I think
Ro Khanna is all about that. Well, the entire Progressive Caucus is all over that. They've had the last two legislative sessions, there has been legislation introduced to provide for those Medicare and Medicaid waivers. It's just that they've never been able to pass them.
Why can't we move it? Is it just a numbers game?
Yeah, I think they might have passed in the House of Representatives. I'm not sure, but because I remember the debate, I just don't remember the vote. But if it passed in the House, it got bottled up in the Senate, with a filibuster. I'm not certain, though, that it passed the House. The problem is you've got, we still have, a substantial handful, 20, 30 corporate Democrats, the Josh Gottheimers of the world, who are eagerly taking large quantities of money from the healthcare industry, the health insurance industry specifically. And so they won't go along with this. And that's why we need a really substantial majority.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if you knew. You probably did, I'm sure. during the Affordable Care Act debates, we did get a waiver. We got it passed. We got it through committee. Dennis Kucinich carried it through committee, and it actually passed with Republican and Democratic votes because they love the states' rights stuff. The Repubs love the states' rights. But Nancy Pelosi felt like it might be a deal killer in the final bill. So she said, no, we got to strip it out.
Yeah, it would have provoked a filibuster.
Oh yeah, there would have been a problem. But that was now 14 years ago. It doesn't seem possible, but it's been a long time since we did that. So we got to keep pushing on it. I told you about Denver, and we're trying to do something like California did when Gavin Newsom was mayor of San Francisco. He passed a program called the Healthy San Francisco program that tacked a tiny little percentage onto every bill for hotel or for restaurant. And then all those people who lived in the city of San Francisco had no access to care any other way through any other program were covered. It was the first universal health care program in a city in the country, and probably the only one now. And they got up into the 90 percentile getting people covered. But again, that was covering this small percentage of people who didn't have access any other way, not through Medi-Cal, not through Medicare, not through insurance, not through any other way. I guess I feel I'm kind of a proponent of continuing to take, John Conyers always used to say, kick the can down the road, kick the can down the road, keep it going. And I think that matters. I think if we can get measures that move us closer, someday a tipping point, right? Maybe.
Yeah, I think so. I really do. And it might be a crisis. I think you could argue that we've been in a state of healthcare crisis in a big way, certainly for 30 or 40 years. Or it could be the force of personality. If Gavin Newsom gets elected president in 2028, or if Joe Biden gets reelected and he has a Democratic House and Senate and he has a come to Jesus moment and decides that he's going to do what Barack Obama couldn't. It's hard to predict, but the fact of the matter is that we are spending literally twice as much money on healthcare as, for example, Canada, and we're not covering everybody, and Canada does, and we have a lower lifespan than Canada does, and it's just and that's true of comparing the United States to literally every other advanced democracy in the world, all the way down to Costa Rica. Costa Rica has a national healthcare system, everybody covered, very inexpensive, it works great. So it's not like proof of concept hasn't been done.
Yeah, exactly. We don't need to test.
Yeah, most Americans just don't know.
Another subject on healthcare that I'm so interested in, because so many of my grandkids, because of the healthcare issues around, they don't get access to great healthcare either. They get what can be afforded and what their parents provide for them. But my gosh, if we would put just a pinch more attention into preventing some of the problems that these kids are having now. We have grandkids with diabetes, for goodness sakes. And it's not, I always feel like it's not really their fault. They're in a culture where what's available to them to eat is always not very healthy. And the stuff that's expensive for their families, they don't get a lot of fruits and vegetables and the things that might create good health. And I think the healthcare industry is culpable in letting that continue, actually, in some ways. I mean, sure. We're a ready market, right? Americans, aren't we a ready market for them?
Yeah, it's not a wellness industry, it's a sickness industry.
Yeah, exactly. And holistic caregivers have been wanted for years to be included somehow as part of what we do, and they're shut out, where in other countries they get to do things. I saw in your background that some of your family's from Norway, right?
My mother's family.
My mother's family and from Norway. And I was lucky enough last summer, a friend took me on a cruise, never been there. And listening to the tour guide, not prompted, talk about what they give one another as a matter of course. Schooling, healthcare, their transportation is very important in Norway, very. So and the last thing he said to us without prompting was, we feel like we invest in each other and that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's a we society rather than a me society. We've been badly infected by the whole Ayn Rand meme.
Oof, I am telling you, it is rough, rough stuff. So I want to add, one of the things I'd like to have you tell us, who's your hero? Who are your heroes?
Well, politically, I think probably Franklin Roosevelt is my number one political hero. He took it to them. He stood up to the money changers, as it were, and did it without fear or favor, as the old saying goes. He was an amazing man. I mean, some of his policies in retrospect were not, as progressive as you might like. But it was the 1930s. It was just 100 years ago, so it was a very different country in many ways. But I would love to see another Franklin Roosevelt in the White House. And frankly, the thing that has impressed me about Joe Biden in particular over the last 2 years, well, actually through his entire presidency, he hit the ground running, is that he seems to be taking a cue from FDR. He's the first Democrat, really in my lifetime, who might characterize himself as an FDR Democrat. John Kennedy was trying to become a little more conservative. Lyndon Johnson was a good FDR Democrat, although he, sadly, Robert McNamara lied him into the war, and then it took him 2 weeks to find out that McNamara had lied to him about the Gulf of Tonkin. But at that point, he was so far in that he couldn't pull himself out, and he just went along with the lie, which was, just a terrible tragedy for LBJ's presidency. But I think that's what we need. We need leaders.
Do we have more than Biden? Do we have other people who can rise up?
I think so.
What do you see?
I think Gavin Newsom is a good shot at it. Frankly, I'm quite impressed by Gavin Newsom.
Me too.
He's a competent politician, and he's definitely a very progressive person. My guess is that he will be the nominee in 2028. We'll see. But
that would be really good. He's a great politician.
Yeah.
And he's been good all the way along, I think, for California and all the roles that he has taken on. Yeah. Right now, I wish that Biden would allow Kamala Harris to take a little bit stronger role. And yet I've had others from California say, no. As a woman, I feel like, hey, that's part of the reason the ticket succeeded.
Yeah.
But it's like we don't hear much about her. You have to really follow her to know what's going on. What do you think? Should they lift her up a little more?
I wrote an op-ed about this about 3 or 4 weeks ago, saying that Kamala Harris, in all probability, is going to be our president by the end of 6 years from now. Mm-hmm. The odds that Joe Biden will make it into his mid to late 80s as president, fully functioning, are frankly low. Mm-hmm. And the Republicans have already started campaigning, saying, in fact, it was just, who was it? Nikki Haley just said this a couple of weeks ago. She said, a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris. And, okay. It's true. So I think that what they need to be doing is convincing Americans that Kamala Harris wouldn't be bad, in fact, would be a good thing in the White House. But I also get it that she's a woman and she's Black, and those are two major strikes against her that are going to pull away some of the moderate, in quotes, the unaffiliated swing votes, the ones that actually decide the elections, the so-called independents, and which is mostly white people. And so it's a delicate dance, that they're doing, because no matter how much they try to put Joe forward and pull her back, the Republicans are going to come out and push her forward. So they might as well just embrace it. I mean, it's in my opinion, but I'm not running the Democratic Party. So
Oh, thank goodness. You wouldn't want that job, Tom. I think.
I don't think so.
Now, you
but
said politically your hero is FDR. I also know, are you not an ordained minister?
I was many years ago. Yeah,
Do you still have faith? Do you still practice a faith?
I do. I do.
Who do you look up to in that community? Who's a thinker in the faith community that you really, really admire?
That's a tough one. There, I mean, the people that I think are doing like really good work are the people who are on the ground in like the United Church of Christ, which is a very progressive church. You'll recall some years ago they were running ads inviting gay people into the church. People in some of the non-mainstream churches like Unity and the Unitarians. None of those churches have a strong hierarchical system, so there are not names or figures that stand out for you. I think Pope Francis actually has within the constraints of being Catholic and being the Pope, has done a lot of really good stuff. I met Pope John Paul II.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I was kind of impressed by him, but he was not a progressive at all. I mean, he was
No, I don't think
a very
so.
conservative Pope. So I'm wary of leadership in general when it comes to religion, because religion is such a in politics you can say, okay, here's this policy or here's that policy, and religion is much more squishy, and it's so much easier for people in the religious context, in the context of organized religion, to basically create cults and exploit their flock. Jesus, or actually Paul, well, no, Jesus warned about that in John at some length. So, yeah.
Yeah, I always find it interesting because those of us who identify ourselves as Democrats or progressives often don't talk much about our faith. It's a quiet thing, in part because I think we see it as kind of personal and private, and it's something that, nobody else has that's guaranteed us. Nobody has the right to tell us what we believe and who we believe in and how we believe.
Yeah.
And yet the Republicans, the right wingers, seem to have grabbed this idea that they're the ones who care, and it's just infuriating at times. And yet to fight it doesn't really work very well to fight that particular logic that they are the ones closest to God somehow.
Well, they're using it for political power, and that should be the tell that it's not sincere.
Yeah.
Political power or wealth. I mean, Pat Robertson died a billionaire. Franklin Graham is a multi-millionaire. I have respect for people who take vows of poverty, live in monasteries and nunneries. And, I have tremendous respect for people like that. But
yeah, it'd be tough.
The televangelists,
Finally, we got just a few more minutes, just about 3 minutes. I'd love it if you'd say which progressive victory, because I'm big on that, wanting us to celebrate when we win, our wins. Which win should we put out there and really talk about and help people feel positive, not only fighting against, but fighting for? What's our win that you really...
You mean in things that have been accomplished in the last few years?
Yeah.
Well, I think the Inflation Reduction Act and it's just massively moving America away from fossil fuels and toward renewable energy is to paraphrase Joe Biden, a BFD. I was skeptical that it could even pass in the truncated version. I mean, I remember when Bernie came out with his $5 or $6 trillion version of it. And
I loved his version.
Yeah, and then I got to cut down even further. But I think that's probably the big one. I mean, a lot of the other things dated back to COVID. The Rescue America Act, I think it was the American Rescue Plan, I believe it was called.
Yeah, I think so.
in 2021, which was great. And it did a lot of really good stuff. And, it extended the child tax credits and things like that.
Big deal.
But it's all gone now, or most of it is gone.
People are hurting about that. Some of the Medicaid pullback has really caused trouble in some states. So,
Oh yeah, in Texas, it's like what, 1 million people have lost their health insurance.
but they really care about their kids down there.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thom Hartmann, you are one of my heroes, really, truly. Your thought just opens up a whole different kind of world for me politically, and helps me feel like we can do stuff together and make the world just a little better for our having been here. You are a wonderful guy, and I appreciate so much everything that you help us all know in the world of politics and in the world of life. And kudos to you and to your family, and all good to you. I will let you know when we are launched. We're launching Labor Day week. We don't know which day yet, but
Great.
you are the first guest. I'm so excited and so honored and so grateful. Thank you, Thom Hartmann, for everything.
Thank you, Donna. Thanks for
All right.
inviting me on your program. And good luck.
Absolutely. See you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.